My name is Lauren Clark. I'm 29 years old, a sergeant in the United States Army. On Thanksgiving night, when I refused to give my savings to my father, he threw the box containing my bronze star onto the lawn and screamed, "You're nothing but a leech. Get out of this house." I just stood there and smiled. That smile seemed to upset my mother even more. She hissed through her teeth, "Don't you dare act so superior. You should have just given your father the money, and this would all be over." Before you understand why they could be so cruel, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And please support me with a like and subscribe to hear how a soldier wins back her honor. The air in our small Maple Creek, Pennsylvania dining room was thick enough to cut with the turkey knife. It was a classic American Thanksgiving scene, straight out of a magazine, if you ignored the suffocating tension. The golden brown turkey sat in the center of the table, gleaming under the chandelier. Bowls of creamy mashed potatoes, tangy cranberry sauce, and green bean casserole surrounded it, their steam fogging up the windows against the chilly November night. A perfect pumpkin pie, which my mother, Serafina, had spent all morning on, waited on the sideboard. But the aroma of roasted herbs and cinnamon couldn't mask the bitter scent of resentment that had been simmering in this house for years. My father, Silas, sat at the head of the table, a can of Coors Light sweating in his big, calloused hand. He was a man hollowed out by the closure of the Bethlehem steel plant a decade ago, and every day since had been a slow, grinding erosion of his pride. My mother sat opposite him, her smile as brittle as the fall leaves on the lawn, her eyes darting between us, constantly managing the fragile peace. And my little sister, Aurora, 17 and trapped in the crossfire, just tried to make herself as small as possible, pushing her food around her plate. I kept my back straight, a habit drilled into me by the Army. I ate methodically, cutting my turkey into precise squares. Silence was a weapon in this house, and my parents were masters of it. "Heard they're pulling some real nice bass out of Raystown Lake," Silas finally grumbled, breaking the quiet. He took a long swallow of his beer. "Gary and his kid went last weekend, pulled in a 10-pounder. I said nothing, just took a sip of water. I knew this wasn't about fishing. It never was. He slammed the can down on the table, making the silverware jump. "All my friends, they're out there on the weekends, on their boats, enjoying their retirement. What do? I sit here, in this house, like a damn failure." His eyes, bloodshot and angry, found mine across the table. "You know, a decent bass boat, a used one, isn't even that much. $5,000 maybe." There it was, the opening salvo. Serafina jumped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Silas, don't bother Lauren with that now. She's on leave. She's here to relax." It was a classic pincer move. He was the aggressor, she was the peacemaker, both working towards the same objective, my wallet. "I need $5,000, Lauren," he said, ignoring her completely. "From your savings. It's the least you can do." I placed my fork and knife neatly on my plate. I looked him in the eye, my voice calm and even. "Dad, I can't do that. You know I'm saving that money. It's my down payment for an apartment when I muster out." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. It was the spark hitting the fuse. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. The chair screeched against the hardwood floor as he shot to his feet, his fist crashing down on the table. "Apartment? You think you're better than this house? Better than us?" he roared. He stormed out of the dining room and into the living room. We heard him rummaging around the bookshelf where I kept a few of my military mementos. He came back holding the small blue velvet box. My heart stopped. "You're so proud of this, aren't you?" he bellowed, his voice cracking with rage. He held up the box containing my bronze star. "This little piece of metal. Does it buy me any respect? Does it put a boat on the water for me?" Aurora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My mother just watched, her face a pale, frozen mask. Before anyone could move, Silas spun around, yanked open the front door, and hurled the box out into the night. It disappeared into the darkness. A cold blast of November air rushed into the house. Then he turned back to me, his finger pointing, his whole body trembling. "You're nothing but a leech feeding off us. Get out of this house." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. The training took over. Under fire, you control your breathing, you assess the threat, you don't show weakness. And in that moment of pure shock, an involuntary, cold smile touched my lips. It was a soldier's armor, a reflex against the unthinkable. But my mother saw it as an attack. She glided towards me, her eyes narrowed to slits. "What are you smiling at? Do you think this is funny?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "This is all your fault. You know how your father gets. You should have just given him the money and we could have had a peaceful holiday. Don't you dare stand there and act so superior." Her words were worse than his actions. He was a wild, uncontrolled explosion. She was the carefully crafted shrapnel, designed to inflict the deepest wound, twisting the blame until it pierced my soul. That night, long after the shouting had stopped and the house had fallen into a resentful silence, I waited. I heard the floorboards creak as they went to their separate rooms. I waited until the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Then I quietly slipped out the back door. The grass was cold and wet against my bare feet, the dampness seeping into my skin. The moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, and I searched in near total darkness, my hands sweeping through the cold, damp blades. Finally, my fingers brushed against the familiar velvet. The box had sprung open on impact, and there it was. The bronze star, half buried, one of its points stuck deep into the dark, moist earth. It lay there, in the mud, like a fallen soldier. I gently worked it free and picked it up, cradling it in my palm. Using the hem of my shirt, I carefully wiped away the grime, polishing the cool metal until it faintly reflected the distant streetlight. I didn't cry. The time for tears was long past. All I felt was a terrifying clarity, a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in my bones. The final tether had been cut. The debt, whatever I thought I owed this place, had been paid in full with this one unforgivable act of desecration. I owed them nothing anymore. I didn't go back inside. There was nothing left for me there. I walked down the dark, quiet street to my Ford F-150s, parked under the sputtering orange glow of a streetlight. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, a comforting sound in the hostile silence. I cranked the heater, the warm air a welcome relief against the chill that had seeped into my bones. A cold that had nothing to do with the November air. The house was still visible in my rearview mirror, its windows lit up like accusing eyes. In the pocket of my jacket, my fingers closed around the cold, hard edges of the bronze star. The weight of it felt different now, heavier. How did it come to this? How does a symbol of honor become a weapon used against you by your own family? As I sat there, wrapped in the quiet hum of the engine, the past 2 years began to unspool in my mind, not as a collection of memories, but as a battle map, detailing every skirmish, every strategic loss that led to tonight's devastating ambush. It all started when the steel plant finally gave up the ghost 2 years ago. My father, Silas, had worked the blast furnace for 35 years. That job was his identity, his pride. When it was gone, a vital part of him withered and died. At first, my help was just that. Help? A few $100s here and there to cover the property tax, a little extra for groceries. "Just until I get back on my feet," he'd grumble, unable to look me in the eye. But he never got back on his feet. The help became an expectation, and the expectation became a demand. Soon, my bi-weekly paycheck was routed not to my savings, but to their survival. It became the mortgage payment. It became the utility bills. It became the $500 for a new water heater. I remembered the phone calls from my mother, Serafina. They always started the same way, with a cheerful, almost frantic inquiry about my safety. "Oh, Lauren, honey, are you eating enough? Are you staying warm?" But the warmth in her voice was just the prelude to the inevitable cold front. "You know, honey, the roof started leaking again, and the handyman says it's an emergency." I had become their logistics officer, their sole supply line, running a constant convoy of funds from my army base to the front lines of their financial mismanagement. I was maintaining a forward operating base for a unit that never once said thank you. The only time I ever saw a flicker of pride in my father's eyes was when he was at the local VFW hall, bragging to his buddies. But he wasn't bragging about my service or my accomplishments. He was bragging about my pay grade and the size of my direct deposit. "Yeah, my kid's a sergeant," he'd say, slapping the bar top. "Pulls in good money, the government takes care of her." I wasn't his daughter, I was his government benefit. Then came the jealousy, a poison that seeped into the foundations of our relationship. I came home on leave last year to find the back fence sagging. A section of it completely collapsed into the neighbor's yard. Silas had been meaning to fix it for months, he said. So I spent 2 days in the hot July sun, digging new post holes, leveling the panels, and securing the gate. It was hard work, but satisfying. Mr. Henderson from next door, an old Marine vet from the Vietnam era, came over when I was done. He ran a hand over the sturdy new fence, then looked at me and gave a firm, approving nod. "You did good work, Sergeant," he said, shaking my hand. He turned to my father, who was watching from the porch. "You've got a real soldier there, Silas." My father didn't answer. He just grunted, turned his back, and shuffled inside, letting the screen door slam behind him. In that moment, the battle map became crystal clear. My competence wasn't a source of pride for him, it was a threat. My ability to fix what he couldn't was a public indictment of his own perceived failure. Every small success of mine was another nail in the coffin of his fragile ego. But the memories of my mother were the ones that cut the deepest. Serafina was the master of covert operations. I remember a frantic, tearful phone call. She needed money, she sobbed, for an emergency medical procedure. She was vague on the details, just that it was urgent and embarrassing. I wired the money without a second thought. 2 months later, a picture Aurora posted on Instagram told the real story. It was a photo from their church picnic. My mother was smiling widely, her teeth a brilliant, almost blinding white, her forehead unnaturally smooth. Aurora, bless her innocent heart, had captioned it. "Mom showing off her new smile after her birthday spa day." When I confronted her, the tears came instantly. "Oh, Lauren, you make it sound so ugly," she cried into the phone. "I just wanted to look presentable for the congregation. It was a teeth whitening and a little Botox, that's all." Don't you want your mother to not be ashamed at church? She had a genius for it, twisting her vanity into my responsibility, her desires into my duty. She did the same thing with a Coach handbag she'd claimed was a cheap knockoff from a flea market. My money wasn't for necessities. It was to fund her fantasy of a life she felt she deserved. A fog was beginning to roll in, blanketing the quiet Pennsylvania hills in a soft, gray haze. I looked at the house one last time. I had seen the map. I had identified the enemy combatants. I understood their tactics. The shock of tonight had finally given way to the cold, hard logic of a soldier. You don't win a war alone. You need allies. You need a secure rear flank. My hand closed around my phone. The screen lit up the dark cab of the truck. My thumb hovered over the contacts. Not my aunt, not my uncle. They were civilians, unequipped for this kind of fight. I scrolled to the one person I knew would understand. The one person who knew the meaning of having someone's back. He picked up on the second ring. "Jax." His name came out as a quiet rasp. My voice, for the first time all night, had a slight tremor in it. The armor had its first crack. "Jax," I said again, a little stronger this time. "I have a situation. I need a rally point." There was no hesitation. The moment I ended the call with Jax, the mission began. A strategic withdrawal isn't about retreat. It's about preserving your assets to fight another day. And I had assets inside that house I couldn't leave behind. I drove my F-150 back, parking it a block away from the house, concealed in the deep shadows of an old oak tree. I killed the engine and the lights, plunging my world into near total darkness. For a full minute, I just sat and observed. Lights were on in my parents' bedroom and the living room. Standard procedure. Observe your objective before you move in. I exited the truck, closing the heavy door with a quiet, controlled click. I moved along the backyards of the neighboring houses, a ghost in the suburban landscape. The skills they teach you for moving through hostile territory in Afghanistan are surprisingly effective in a quiet Pennsylvania neighborhood after midnight. I vaulted a low chain-link fence, and landed silently on the damp grass of my own backyard. The back door was my insertion point. I knew the third pane of glass from the bottom was loose. I slipped the thin blade of my multi-tool into the gap and gently worked the lock open. No sound. The door swung inward with a faint whisper. I was in. The house was still. The air was stale with the lingering smells of turkey and anger. I moved without a sound, my bare feet making no purchase on the worn linoleum. This wasn't a panicked flight, it was an extraction. I had a clear list of objectives, prioritized and memorized. No clothes, no keepsakes, only mission-critical equipment. Objective 1, my laptop. It was in my old bedroom, sitting on the desk. On it were my financial records, bank statements, deployment orders, the entire paper trail of my life, my independence. I slipped it into my backpack. Objective 2, the document box. It was a small fireproof safe in the back of my closet containing my passport, my birth certificate, and my military service records. The proof of who I was, separate from this family. It fit snugly next to the laptop. Objective 3 was personal. Tucked under my bed was a small carved wooden box. Inside were the only things I had left of my grandmother, her silver locket and a stack of her letters, written to me when I was in basic training. She was the only one who had ever seen me, really seen me. Leaving that behind was not an option. As I zipped the backpack, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze, every muscle tensed. The doorknob to my room turned with excruciating slowness. The door opened a crack, revealing my sister Aurora's terrified face, her eyes wide and swimming with tears in the dim light from the hall. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her until it was barely ajar. She didn't say a word, just shoved a folded piece of paper into my hand. Her own hand was trembling. "It's Dad's bank statement. I saw where he hides it, under his mattress," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. My eyes scanned the paper. It was worse than I thought. The account was nearly empty. His desperation wasn't just about a boat. It was about total financial collapse. "Mom's got a spa day booked for next week," Aurora added, her voice cracking. "Go, Lauren. Just go. Fast." This wasn't a random outburst. This was a conspiracy of desperation, and I was their only bailout plan. I pulled her into a hug, quick and tight. It wasn't a hug of comfort, it was a hug of promise. A promise that I would be back for her. "Stay strong," I whispered, and then I was gone. I slipped back out into the night as silently as I had come. The drive to the next town over was short, but it felt like crossing a border into another country. The Ranger's Rest, Jax's place, was a low brick building on a quiet side street. A simple neon sign glowed "Bar" in the window. It wasn't fancy, but it was safe. It was a rally point for veterans from all over the county. The moment I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the warmth and the low thrum of Creedence Clearwater Revival on the jukebox wrapped around me. The air smelled of spilled beer, sawdust, and something fundamentally decent. Jax was behind the bar, a mountain of a man with a thick beard and a sleeve of tattoos running up his arm, methodically polishing a glass. He looked up as I walked in, his dark eyes taking in my backpack, my disheveled appearance, and the controlled tremor in my hands. He saw it all in one glance. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't ask why I was there. An Army Ranger doesn't need the details to know when a soldier is in trouble. He simply put down his glass, walked over to the whiskey shelf, and poured a generous measure of Jack Daniels into a clean glass. He slid it across the polished wood to me. Then he reached under the counter and produced a single, old-fashioned key. "Go on up, Sergeant," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "The room upstairs is empty. Key's the same as always." He looked me straight in the eye. "We'll draw up a plan of attack in the morning." Upstairs, the room was simple, just a bed, a dresser, and a small table with a lamp. But it was clean, and more importantly, it was secure. I dropped my backpack on the floor and took out the blue velvet box. I placed my bronze star on the table under the warm yellow light. It looked small and lonely. A few minutes later, Jax came up with a steaming bowl of beef stew. The rich smell filled the small room, He set it on the table, and his eyes fell on the metal. He didn't touch it. He just looked at it, then back at me. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "They don't know what this is, do they?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. "It's not just a piece of metal, Lauren. It's the blood and the sweat. It's the 120-degree heat and the dust that gets in your teeth. It's the sleepless nights on watch. It's for the guys who didn't come home." Hearing him say it, hearing him give voice to the truth of it, the wall I had built inside me finally cracked. No tears fell, but a single, sharp nod was all I could manage. Here, in this simple room, with this man who understood the cost of things, I was finally understood. It's an incredible feeling, isn't it? To be truly seen by someone when you feel completely alone. If you've ever had that one person in your life who stood by you like a rock, please support my story with a like, and if you believe in the power of a chosen family, just comment with the word "always" below. In that moment, I knew the strategic withdrawal was complete. I had reached my base, I had found my counsel, and tomorrow, the war would begin. The sun rose the next morning, casting long shadows across the floor of the small apartment. The smell of strong black coffee from a sputtering Mr. Coffee machine filled the air. I hadn't slept much, but I wasn't tired. I was energized, focused. The emotional fog of the previous night had burned away, leaving behind the cold, hard clarity of a mission. The small kitchen table became my command center. My laptop was open, files and financial statements neatly organized on the screen. Beside it, a yellow legal pad and a pen stood ready. The only sound was the scratching of my pen on paper as I finalized a checklist. Jack sat across from me, a silent, steady presence, nursing a mug of coffee. He'd already been up for hours, prepping his bar for the day. He didn't hover, he didn't offer platitudes. He was simply there, my counsel, my rear guard. He took a slow sip from his mug and looked at my list. "What's the primary objective, Sergeant?" he asked, his voice calm. I looked up from my notes, my own voice devoid of any emotion. "Sever all logistical and financial supply lines," I stated, as if reading from a mission briefing. "Establish a secure, impenetrable perimeter around my assets. We begin with the basic utilities." He gave a single, sharp nod. The plan of attack was set. The first call was to Keystone, Power, and Light. I had the account number and all my personal details ready. The customer service representative on the other end was cheerful and followed a script. I was polite, professional, and firm. "Good morning," I began. "I'm calling to have my name removed from the account associated with the property at 114 Maple Street. I am no longer financially responsible for that residence." There was a pause, a series of clicks as she typed. "Okay, ma'am. I see you are the primary account holder. To remove you, we would need to close the account entirely." "Correct," I said. "Please proceed with the closure, effective immediately." "And the new account holder will be—" "I have no information on that," I replied coolly. "My only objective is to terminate my own liability." There were more clicks, another pause, and then, "Okay, Ms. Clark, your request has been processed. The account will be closed at the end of the current billing cycle." One down. I drew a firm black line through the first item on my list. Next was the gas company, then the water authority, then ComSource, the cable and internet provider. Each call was a variation of the same theme. I was a calm, immovable force of logic against their bureaucratic scripts. I did not explain. I did not offer a story. I simply stated my objective and provided the necessary information to execute it. With each, "Your request has been completed, Ms. Clark." From the other end of the line, I felt another brick being laid in the defensive wall I was building around myself. The most difficult call was to my health insurance provider. This was the one that felt personal. This was about neutralizing my mother's favorite weapon, manipulation through feigned medical need. The representative was hesitant, and I understood why. "So you want to remove your mother, Serafina Clark, as a dependent from your policy?" he asked, a note of confusion in his voice. "This would leave her without coverage, you understand, huh?" I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. "I understand completely," I said. However, I have reason to believe that the benefits of this policy are being abused for non-medical, cosmetic purposes. As the policyholder and as an active duty service member, I am officially requesting the immediate termination of all benefits for my listed dependent. Please send written confirmation to my email address on file. I had turned her lies into a contractual violation. The representative, hearing the official tone and the mention of my military status, changed his tune. Yes, Sergeant, right away. Another line drawn through my list. The perimeter was getting stronger. The final and most critical objective was securing the Treasury. I dialed the number for USAA, the bank that serves the military community. This call was different. These people were on my side. USAA, this is Michael. How can I help you? Good morning, Michael, I said. This is Sergeant Lauren Clark. I'm calling to report a lost or stolen debit card. The card in question was the joint one linked to the account my parents could access. I'm sorry to hear that, Sergeant. Let me lock that card for you right now. The speed and efficiency were immediate. Okay, the card is now deactivated. No further transactions can be made. Thank you, Michael, I continued, moving to the next phase. I also need to transfer the entire balance of my primary savings account, number ending in 4521, into a new, individual account under my name only. I want to set up new two-factor authentication and security questions. I gave him the answers to the new questions, things only I could possibly know. My first platoon sergeant's name. The designation of the forward operating base where I had earned my Bronze Star. Things that couldn't be guessed or gleaned from a conversation at a church picnic. Michael typed, the clicks of his keyboard a reassuring rhythm. All right, Sergeant Clark, he said after a few moments. Your new account is established. The funds have been transferred. Your previous joint card is locked, and a new card for this secure account is on its way to your APO address. He paused, then added, Your assets are secure, Sergeant. A long, slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped my lungs. It was done. The wall was built. The supply lines were cut. The Treasury was locked down. The defensive perimeter was established. I hung up the phone and looked at the completed checklist. Every item was crossed out. Jax looked over at me from the bar, raising an eyebrow in a silent question. I gave him a curt, single nod. Mission accomplished. Now, all I had to do was wait for the enemy to realize their lines had been cut. The silence that followed felt heavy, charged, like the dead quiet in the air right before a storm breaks. The silence that followed my operation was profound. It lasted for exactly 48 hours, 2 full days of a quiet so deep it felt loud, like the dead air before an explosion. I knew it wasn't peace. It was the enemy regrouping, discovering their supply lines had been cut, and re-aiming their weapons. I spent the time helping Jax around the bar, cleaning glasses, restocking shelves, my mind calm, my body in motion. I was preparing the defenses for the inevitable counter-assault. It began on Saturday morning. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, buzzed on the countertop. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was from. My mother. She must have gotten my number from Aurora. The message read, Honey, the TV isn't working. The cable is out. Can you check the online account for me? Love you. The casualness was a tactic, an attempt to pretend nothing had happened. The love you was the poison dart, meant to find a crack in my armor. I read the message. I did not reply. I held my finger down on the number and pressed block contact. The first reconnaissance probe had been neutralized. Minutes later, another buzz, a different number. This one was from my father. There was no pretense of affection. The power is out. What the hell did you do? Call me now. The rage was palpable even through the screen, the capital letters like little digital shouts. He wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation. I followed the same procedure. Read, do not reply, block contact. These were just the opening shots, meant to test my defenses. The real artillery barrage was yet to come. When they couldn't get through to my personal line, they escalated. Later that afternoon, The bar's old landline phone began to ring. It was a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the low murmur of the afternoon regulars. Jax looked at me from the other end of the bar, and I gave him a slight nod. I walked over and picked up the receiver. "Rangers rest," I said, my voice even. "Lauren!" The roar on the other end was pure Silas. "You think you can hide from me? You're an ungrateful, selfish child. After all the years I worked my fingers to the bone to raise you, this is how you repay me? You're going to let your own mother and father starve and freeze in the dark?" It was a classic barrage of guilt and anger. Before I could even think of a response, not that I planned to give one, the phone was snatched on the other end. My mother's voice, thick with manufactured tears, replaced his. "Lauren, honey, how could you be so cruel?" she sobbed. "What did we ever do to deserve this? Your father was just a little upset. You know how he gets. Is that any reason to treat us like enemies? We're your family." It was a perfectly coordinated attack. The shock and awe assault from my father, followed by the psychological warfare from my mother. One plays the aggressor, the other plays the victim. They had been running this play on me my entire life. I stood there, listening to her practice sobs, feeling nothing but a profound, weary disappointment. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the receiver back in its cradle, gently cutting off her performance mid-sob. When direct assault failed, they opened a second front. Public opinion. An hour later, my phone rang again. A number I recognized. My Aunt Mary. I took a deep breath and answered. "Lauren, thank God. Your mother called me. She's an absolute wreck," my aunt began, her voice dripping with a syrupy blend of concern and judgment. "She told me everything. How could you just take all the family savings and run off with those rough friends of yours? Your parents are beside themselves with worry. They don't have a dollar to their name because of you." There it was. The smear campaign. I was no longer just an ungrateful daughter. I was a thief who had abandoned her destitute parents to hang out with a gang of alcoholic veterans. The narrative was perfect, designed to isolate me, to turn the one family member who'd ever shown me kindness against me. They were turning me into the villain of my own story. I kept my voice calm, betraying none of the cold anger solidifying in my gut. "Aunt Mary," I said simply, "there's more to the story than what you heard. I promise I'll talk to you later." "Well, you'd better have a good explanation," she huffed, her sympathy evaporating now that I wasn't immediately capitulating. "Family is family, Lauren." I ended the call before she could continue. There was no point in explaining. Any defense I offered would be twisted and used as more ammunition against me. In psychological warfare, sometimes the only winning move is not to play. The final attack of the day came after sundown. My phone rang one last time. No caller ID. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, putting it on speaker for Jax to hear. It was Silas. But the shouting was gone. His voice was low, gravelly, and laced with a menace that was far more terrifying than his rage. "I don't know where you're hiding," he began, his voice a low growl. "But you can't hide forever. You think you can just cut us off? After everything we gave you?" He paused, and I could hear him breathing heavily. "You owe me. You owe this house. You just wait. I'm going to find you, and I'm coming to get what's mine." The line went dead. The threat hung in the air between me and Jax, heavy and cold as a block of ice. This was a different kind of war now. He had just escalated it from a battle of finances and emotions to a direct threat against my physical safety. I looked at Jax. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable but solid. He picked up a bar towel and calmly wiped down a clean spot on the counter. "It's all right, Sergeant," he said, his voice a steady rumble. "This rally point is always ready for uninvited guests." The quiet of the Sunday afternoon was shattered by the squeal of tires. I was upstairs, sorting through the documents I'd recovered, when the sound of my father's beat-up Ford pickup truck skidding to a halt on the street outside sent a jolt through the floorboards. Jax was downstairs, and I heard the low thud of him setting down a heavy beer keg. We both knew. The enemy was at the gates. I looked out the window. Silas stumbled out of the driver's side, his face a blotchy, furious red, his movements unsteady with the lethal combination of alcohol and rage. He didn't even glance at the front door of the bar. His eyes were locked on the side door, the private entrance to the apartment. He was on a mission. He stormed across the small patch of grass, his heavy work boots crushing the dormant winter lawn. "Lauren!" The roar was guttural, inhuman. "You get out here, now, you damn thief!" Then came the sound I'd been expecting, a heavy rhythmic thump-thump-thump as his fists began to hammer against the solid wood of the door. The entire doorframe shuddered with each impact. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained violence. Across the quiet street, curtains twitched. Mrs. Gable from the bakery next door peered out her front window, her hand over her mouth. My father wasn't just attacking me. He was making a public spectacle of his own unraveling. Inside, there was no panic, only a cold, calculated readiness. I came to the top of the stairs. Jax was standing at the bottom, a Louisville slugger held loosely in one hand. He wasn't tense, just ready. A silent guardian at his post. He looked up at me, his expression grim. "Call it in," he said, his voice a low rumble. I nodded. My hands were perfectly steady as I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The discipline of 100 training drills took over. Emotion was a liability. Procedure was a shield. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. "This is Sergeant Lauren Clark," I began, my voice clear and even, enunciating every word. "I am at the Ranger's Rest, 45 Westside Avenue. There is a male individual, Silas Clark, attempting to break down the door to my residence. He is shouting threats and appears to be intoxicated and violent. I am in fear for my safety." I gave her my name, my father's name, the address. I used the language of a formal report. I was not a hysterical daughter calling about a family squabble. I was a citizen, a soldier, reporting a crime in progress. Outside, the hammering continued, punctuated by my father's ragged shouts. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably less than 3 minutes before the distant wail of sirens cut through the air, growing closer with each passing second. The sound seemed to break my father's frenzied rhythm. He stopped pounding on the door and spun around, blinking stupidly as 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, pulled up to the curb. 2 officers got out. One was young, his face taut with adrenaline. The other was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weary but steady look in his eyes. He was the one in charge. "Afternoon, sir. What seems to be the problem here?" The older officer asked, his voice calm but authoritative. His hand rested casually on his belt, near his service weapon. My father, instead of de-escalating, puffed out his chest. His voice boomed across the street. "This is a family matter, officer. My daughter stole my money, and she's hiding in there with her deadbeat friends." He jabbed a thick finger towards the door he had just been assaulting. "I'm her father. I have a right to be here." This was my cue. I walked down the stairs, past Jax, and opened the door. I was still wearing my Army combat uniform, my ACUs, from sorting through my military records earlier. I stood in the doorway, my posture straight, my expression unreadable. The contrast between my controlled stillness and my father's wild, disheveled state was stark. "Officer," I said, my voice steady, addressing the older cop. "My name is Sergeant Lauren Clark. This man is my father. I left his home on Thanksgiving night after he threatened me. He has now followed me here, is attempting to break in, and has damaged private property." The officer's eyes moved from me, standing straight in my uniform, to my father, reeking of beer and fury. Then his gaze fell on the door, where deep dents and splintered wood marked the spot where my father's fists had landed. He looked back at Silas, and his weary expression hardened into one of professional resolve. "Sir, your money problems are a civil matter. You can take that up in court," the officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But threatening behavior and destruction of property get settled right here, right now." He took a step forward. "Mr. Clark, you are under arrest for disturbing the peace and willful destruction of property. You have the right to remain silent." The color drained from my father's face. His jaw went slack. The drunken, righteous anger was replaced by a look of utter, stunned disbelief as the younger officer stepped forward and put his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The man who had ruled my life with his explosive temper, whose moods had dictated the emotional weather of our household for decades, was suddenly powerless. His authority, built on fear and intimidation, crumbled to dust in the face of the law. That moment of justice, of seeing the bully finally face a consequence he couldn't escape, was breathtaking. If you have ever felt powerless and wished for a moment just like this, please support this story with a like and comment with the single word, justice, below. As they led him to the patrol car, a stunned and broken man, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt the first, quiet, earth-shattering tremor of freedom. The siege was over, but I knew the legal battle had just begun. The arrest was a public declaration of war, but my father's battle tactics were loud, clumsy, and predictable. My mother's, however, were not. Serafina was a master of the covert operation, the quiet knife in the back. I knew her counterattack would be subtle, insidious, and aimed at what I held most dear. 2 days after Silas made bail, my phone buzzed with a message. It wasn't a text, but an image sent from a new number I knew belonged to Aurora. My stomach tightened. The picture was of a flimsy yellow pawn ticket from a shop downtown called Quick Cash. Underneath the photo was a single frantic line of text from my sister. Mom took Grandma's jewelry box and the new camera you bought. Said she needed the money for Dad's bail bond. A cold, sharp iciness spread through my veins, a chill that had nothing to do with the Pennsylvania winter. It wasn't about the monetary value. The Canon camera was replaceable, but the jewelry box, that was my grandmother's. It was a small hand-carved wooden box filled with her modest treasures. A simple gold locket, a string of pearls, the silver brooch she wore to church every Sunday. They were the only tangible things I had left of the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally. This wasn't theft for survival. This was a desecration. Serafina had just opened a second front, a battleground of deceit and desecration. Another message from Aurora came through, her words filled with outrage. She's been telling the neighbors she had to sell her heirlooms to buy groceries since you abandoned them. Mrs. Gable gave her a casserole. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She was not only a thief but a con artist, weaponizing her lies to paint herself as a pitiable victim. But panic is a luxury a soldier cannot afford. Rage is an emotion that must be channeled into action. I felt the familiar click in my brain, the switch from emotional response to logistical planning. My mother had made a critical error. She had underestimated her opponent. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and entered a password. A folder on my desktop unlocked. Its name was Inventory. As a logistics officer, I live by a code: document everything. What you can't track, you can't control. Every significant personal asset I owned was cataloged in that folder. I clicked open the file for my grandmother's jewelry. There they were, high-resolution photos of each piece, taken from multiple angles with detailed descriptions. A small chip on the locket, the specific clasp on the pearl necklace. I had scanned the original receipts for the camera, its serial number clearly visible. I printed everything. The stack of paper that emerged from Jax's old printer was more than just a list. It was an arsenal. It was an undeniable dossier of ownership. I had just transformed my personal keepsakes into military-grade assets with a clear paper trail. With this file in hand, I knew my next move. I didn't go to the local Maple Creek Police Department, where my father knew half the officers. I looked up the number for the nearest Judge Advocate General's Corps office, the Army's legal arm. I was a soldier, and I would use the resources the military provided to protect its own. A captain on the other end of the line listened patiently as I gave a concise, professional briefing. Captain, this is Sergeant Lauren Clark. I'm currently on leave. I am the victim of a personal property theft perpetrated by a family member who is also the subject of a pending domestic violence case initiated by me. There was no judgment in his voice, only efficiency. Understood, Sergeant. Given the circumstances, we can provide you with immediate legal counsel. He scheduled a pro bono consultation for me that afternoon. The lawyer they assigned me, a sharp major with tired eyes, listened to my story and reviewed my file. He nodded slowly, his fingers steepled. "You have an ironclad case for the theft, Sergeant," he said. "First, we file a police report with this evidence. Then, we file for a formal restraining order against both of your parents. Given the arrest on Sunday and this theft, the judge will almost certainly grant it." He wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from legal advisor to strategic planner. "But there's more. You have the absolute right to recover your personal property from that house," he continued. "Once the restraining order is in place, we will file a motion for a civil standby. This means the court will order local law enforcement to escort you to the residence to retrieve your belongings peacefully. They will not be able to stop you. Your job between now and then is to prepare a comprehensive, itemized list of every single thing in that house that belongs to you. Leave nothing out." I felt a surge of cold, clear power. He had just given me not only a shield, but a sword. I now had more than just evidence. I had a legally backed plan of attack. I thanked the major for his time. That night, back at the apartment above the Ranger's Rest, I began to type. The list started with the obvious: my dress uniforms, my books, the files from my desk. But it grew longer, more detailed. The Ford F-150 in the driveway, registered in my name. The living room television, paid for with my credit card. The set of kitchen knives I'd bought them for Christmas 2 years ago. Each item I added to the list was another round of ammunition. This was no longer just about getting my things back. This was about a full-scale reclamation of my life. The final battle was about to begin. Wednesday morning arrived, crisp and clear. The sky over Maple Creek was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It was the perfect day for a declaration of independence. The convoy that pulled onto my old street felt like a force of liberation. A Maple Creek police cruiser led the way, followed by my borrowed sedan, and behind me, Jax in his heavy-duty Ram pickup, ready for heavy lifting. We parked directly in front of the house. The sight of the police car sent a ripple through the neighborhood. Curtains twitched. This was no longer a private drama. It was a public reckoning. 2 officers, a man and a woman, emerged from the cruiser. The woman, Officer Evans, held the court order. I got out of my car, Jax right beside me. I was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, but I walked towards that front door with my shoulders back, my chin high, my spine as straight as if I were in full dress uniform. This was a mission. My parents opened the door before Officer Evans could knock. Their faces, already etched with resentment, turned ashen when they saw the police. Silas's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. Serafina's mouth tightened into a thin, venomous line. "Good morning," Officer Evans said, her voice polite but firm, impossible to argue with. "We're here to conduct a civil standby. Ms. Clark will be entering the residence to retrieve her personal property as per this court order. Our job is to keep the peace while she does so." She held up the document. The official stamp of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was the only authority that mattered now. "You can't do this," Serafina hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "This is our home." "Ma'am, the court says we can," the officer replied calmly. "Please step aside." I walked past them, into the house that was no longer my home. I held my clipboard, the alphabetized inventory list clipped securely to it. Jax followed, carrying empty boxes. I moved with purpose, a logistics officer conducting a thorough and efficient withdrawal of assets. I didn't look at them. I didn't speak to them. They were obstacles, not family. I started upstairs in my old bedroom. Serafina trailed behind me, a running commentary of venom and self-pity. "Even the sheets? You're really taking the sheets off the bed?" she muttered as I folded the comforter set I'd bought at Target. So cheap, so ungrateful. I didn't answer. I just put a neat check mark next to bedding, queen, gray linen on my list. Jax packed it into a box. We were a silent, efficient team. My books, my clothes, my old track trophies, everything went into a box, got a check mark, and was carried out to the truck. The real battle took place in the living room. Serafina planted herself in front of the 65-inch flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. "You are not taking this," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is the family television. We watch our shows on this." "It's on my list," I said calmly, my eyes on my clipboard. "I don't care. It's ours. It stays." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked over to the female officer who was observing from the doorway. I handed her a folded piece of paper from my file. It was the receipt from Best Buy, dated 8 months prior, showing the purchase of one Samsung 65 4K UHD Smart TV, paid in full with my USAA credit card. Officer Evans glanced at the receipt, then looked at my mother. "Ma'am," she said, her voice still professionally polite, "the proof of purchase says it belongs to her." Serafina stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She was speechless. Her power, built on lies and manipulation, was utterly neutralized by a flimsy piece of thermal paper. Jax unplugged the TV. The final stand happened in the driveway. We had cleared the house. Every box was loaded. The only thing left was my Ford F-150, parked where I'd left it on Thanksgiving. Silas, who had been brooding in silence on the porch, suddenly seemed to snap. He lunged towards the garage, grabbing a heavy crowbar from the toolbox. "You can take the junk inside," he roared, his eyes wild. He stood between me and the truck. "But the truck stays. I drive this truck. It's mine." The male officer, Officer Riley, immediately unsnapped the strap on his baton. "Sir, drop the weapon. Right now," he commanded, his voice sharp and loud. My father hesitated, his knuckles white on the crowbar. He was a cornered animal, ready to do something stupid. I felt no fear, only a final, weary resolve. I calmly walked to Officer Riley and handed him another document. The official vehicle registration from the state of Pennsylvania. My name, Lauren A. Clark, was printed clearly under Registered Owner. The officer's eyes scanned the paper. "Sir," he said to my father, his voice like granite, "this title proves the vehicle belongs to her. Now, I need you to give her the keys." Silas stared at me, his chest heaving. The crowbar was still in his hand. "Give me the keys now, sir," Officer Riley repeated, taking a step forward, his hand moving from his baton to his holster. "Or I'll add resisting arrest and threatening an officer to your charges." Something in my father finally broke. A tremor went through his body. With a choked cry of pure rage and defeat, he threw the crowbar to the ground. It clattered loudly on the concrete. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the key fob, and hurled it onto the driveway. Jax picked it up and handed it to me. I took the keys, my fingers closing around the cool plastic. I looked at my father, truly looked at him, for the last time. His face was a mask of utter devastation. The bully, stripped of his power, was just a sad, broken old man. "The war is over," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Then I turned my back on him, on her, on the whole damn house. I climbed into the driver's seat of my truck, put the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway, but in my rearview mirror, I saw the house, my prison, get smaller and smaller until it was just a tiny speck in the distance. And then, it was gone. Victory doesn't roar. It whispers. After the trucks were unloaded and Jax had left for the night, I stood alone in my new, one-bedroom apartment. The silence was deafening. Cardboard U-Haul boxes were stacked against the walls like sandbags, a fortress of my reclaimed life. I should have felt triumphant, ecstatic. Instead, I felt a profound and bone-deep exhaustion. I sank onto the floor, my back against a stack of boxes, and just breathed. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving behind an unnerving quiet, a hollow space where a family used to be. Jax came by the next evening. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just handed me a cold bottle of Yuengling and sat on the floor with me. We drank in silence for a while, the only sound the clink of our bottles. "We won, Sergeant," he finally said, his voice soft. I managed a weak smile, looking around at the boxed-up pieces of my past. "We did," I replied, my voice raspy. But there are no wars without casualties. The casualty here wasn't a person. It was an idea. The idea of a family I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my place in. I had to finally accept the truth. It was already dead. I had just signed the death certificate. A few weeks later, after the restraining order was permanent and the dust had settled, the letters started to arrive. They were my parents' last-ditch effort to breach my defenses. The first was from Serafini. Her handwriting, usually so neat and controlled, was shaky. The letter was a rambling monologue of self-pity, detailing mysterious new health problems and financial struggles, ending with a perfectly manipulative sentence: "A mother's love is forever Lauren." The second was from Silas. It was short, scrawled on a piece of notebook paper. Just a few angry, misspelled lines blaming me for everything, demanding I rethink my responsibilities. I didn't open them. I read the names on the return addresses, and that was enough. I placed them side by side on the small kitchen counter, a neatly arranged pair of unexploded bombs. The restraining order was my legal wall. My refusal to read their words, that was my mental wall. This counter was the demilitarized zone. They could exist in the world, but they could no longer enter mine. My primary mission now was Aurora. I arranged to meet her at a neutral location, a Starbucks halfway between my apartment and her high school. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the love for me warring with the fear of them. I didn't want to add to her burden by bad-mouthing our parents. That was their tactic, not mine. Instead, I came prepared with a different kind of weapon. I slid a simple spiral notebook across the table to her. "This is for you," I said. She opened it. Inside, I had created a detailed roadmap to her own freedom. I'd printed out information on college scholarships she could apply for, instructions on how to fill out the FAFSA form for student aid, listings for part-time jobs on the local university campus, and a budget comparing the costs of living in a dorm versus an off-campus apartment. "I'll help you with the applications. I'll co-sign for an apartment. I'll be your emergency contact for everything," I told her, my voice firm but gentle. "I will help you get out, but you have to be the one to walk through the door. You have to do it for yourself." I was giving her the one thing I never had, a plan and a promise of support. I wasn't just rescuing my ally, I was training a new soldier in the art of independence. One overcast afternoon a few weeks later, I drove to the cemetery. The air was still and cold. I found my grandmother's grave, a simple granite headstone nestled under a large oak tree. I knelt down and wiped away the damp leaves from her name. From my coat pocket, I took out the small wooden box, the one I had retrieved from the pawnshop. I placed it gently on top of the headstone. I also took out my bronze star. The metal was cool against my palm. I didn't know who I was talking to her, to the wind, to myself. I thought about it a lot. I whispered into the quiet air. I don't hate them. I think that's what's so strange. I just can't. I can't let them hurt me anymore. It's not about winning. It's about being done fighting. I looked down at the medal in my hand. "I chose peace, Grandma. I hope you're proud of me." As the words left my lips, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I understood. Forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about letting yourself off the hook of needing them to be different. It's about putting down the heavy burden of their approval. My peace didn't depend on their apology. It only depended on my own permission to be free. 1 year later, Thanksgiving. The calendar date is the same, but the world is entirely different. My one-bedroom apartment is no longer a strategic outpost filled with cardboard boxes. It's a home. It's not large, but it's filled with light and warmth. The walls aren't decorated with generic art, but with pieces of a life I've built myself. There's a framed photo of my army unit in Afghanistan, a group of us squinting in the desert sun, arms slung over each other's shoulders. There's another of Jax and me on a fishing trip at Raystown Lake, holding up a ridiculously small base and laughing our heads off. On a simple wooden bookshelf, nestled between military history books and novels, sits the bronze star. It's no longer in the velvet box that was thrown in the mud. I had it professionally mounted in a glass shadow box. Under the warm glow of a reading lamp, the bronze medal gleams. It's not a reminder of humiliation anymore. It's a monument to survival, a testament to honor reclaimed. The letters from my parents? They were ceremoniously shredded months ago. Their chapter is closed, the book stored away in a library I no longer visit. I get intelligence reports from the old front lines, of course. Aurora, who now spends most weekends with me, tells me what she hears. Silas and Serafina had to sell the house on Maple Creek. The mortgage, it turned out, was impossible to maintain without their primary source of funding. They now live in a small rental apartment on the other side of town. According to the grapevine, their narrative hasn't changed. They are still the poor, abandoned victims of their ungrateful, selfish daughter. When I hear this, I feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even a flicker of satisfaction. They are just strangers in an old story I no longer read. This weekend, Aurora is here. Now a freshman at Penn State, she's brimming with the chaotic, brilliant energy of someone whose world is just beginning to open up. I found her on Saturday afternoon, staring blankly at the dipstick in her beat-up Honda Civic. "You have to know these things," I told her, grabbing a rag and showing her how to check the oil. "Never, ever depend on anyone else to keep your engine running." She listened intently, a smudge of grease on her cheek. I was teaching her how to change her oil, how to check her tire pressure, how to jumpstart a battery. But really, I was passing down the most valuable inheritance I had: self-reliance. I had broken the cycle of dependency that had poisoned my family for generations. Aurora was not just an ally I had rescued. She was a recruit I was training to be her own warrior. Tonight, there is no 20-pound turkey, no lumpy mashed potatoes, no simmering resentment. Tonight is a soldier's Thanksgiving. The table in my small dining area is covered with greasy cardboard boxes from Domino's Pizza and littered with bottles of Sam Adams beer. The air is filled not with tension, but with laughter. Jax is in the middle of a terrible joke he heard at the bar. Two of his buddies, both Marine vets, are good-naturedly heckling him. And Aurora, my brilliant little sister, is in a heated debate with one of them about whether the Pittsburgh Steelers have any hope of making the playoffs. It's loud, it's chaotic, and it's the most peaceful Thanksgiving I have ever known. I look around the table at these faces, my ragtag group of soldiers and survivors. This is my unit. This is my command. Jax raises his bottle. "All right, settle down," he says, his voice cutting through the noise. "A toast." Everyone quiets down, raising their bottles and pizza crusts. "To Thanksgiving," he says, his eyes finding mine across the table. "For being thankful for the squad that always has your six." "Hooah!" the Marines rumble in agreement. As we all clink our bottles together, a feeling of pure, unadulterated gratitude washes over me. I lost a battle in a small house in Maple Creek. I was ambushed, wounded, and left behind. But I won the war for my own life. I built a new one from the ground up, surrounded by people who don't care about what I can give them, only who I am. This is family. Not the one you are born into by accident, but the one you build on purpose, with loyalty, respect, and love. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest victory of all. And so, my war is over. But I know that for many of you listening, your own battle might just be beginning. My story is proof that the family you build can be stronger than the one you were born into. It's a testament to resilience. If my journey has resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing. This channel is a place for survivors and warriors. If you believe in the power of starting over, comment Chapter 1 below to declare the beginning of your own new story. Thank you for listening.